Oh. Hi, everybody. I'm Anjanette, and I'm here with my co-host, Lorlet Monegro.
Hi, Andra.
So we're going to be talking about labels today, and I think this is something that too many people do. Too many people put labels on one another, and I asked her to really discuss this with me because I think she's just the person to do that. So, Lorlet, you work with people that some people might call disadvantaged or different in many different ways. I've worked with kids who have disabilities at times. I work with kids who have been diagnosed with ADHD. It's a lot more after COVID. But I think that growing up, we hear a lot of different things. You're bad, right? So, and we hear that a lot. No, bad, bad. So, and I think labels like that really change the way we perceive ourselves over time. So, if I'm taught that I'm bad and I hear that a lot, I might grow up believing that I'm inherently bad. So if I hear that I'm different or I'm disabled, I might not, or I'm disadvantaged, I might feel inept or maybe not go for things that I want to do because I'm disadvantaged or I'm disabled. Now, some people look past those labels in their own lives and they say, well, no one gets to put me in a box. I just interviewed an autistic young man who's in college, and he said that everybody told him that he couldn't, and he was like angry that they told him that just because he was autistic he couldn't do certain things. So now he's an activist for autistic people. And I was like, go ahead, Caden. Right? So, and when I tell you that speaking with him, he was such an intelligent young man. And I have no doubt that he's going to achieve anything that he wants to. But I do think that we're very liberal with these labels. What do you think about that?
Yeah, well, I mean, the labels kind of have an entry point, right? The entry point for a label initially begins because people come to someone, for example, like me, asking, hey, my child is not talking, my child is behaving this way. And, what is it? What's wrong with my kid? And so a label will be born out of the situation of trying to identify what is it. What I have an issue with labels is what happens after that, right? The perceptions and people's erroneous ideas around what these labels create for people's lives, right? The children's lives, because we all begin as children. And so I think that one of the things that has to happen for us to stop boxing people in and not make people the label, right?
Exactly.
Is to begin to have more open conversations. Exactly what we're doing right now. We're having, sorry, that's my dog, my daughter's dog around the corner. Um, Not having people have these labels become the person because the person is more than a label. And
Exactly.
oftentimes, even when people start talking around the children, right, they forget that just because they have a condition doesn't mean they don't understand anything,
I
you know?
know. I know. But I think that we're sending a message to them, and I think that a lot of these perceptions come out of lack of knowledge, and that people have a fear or are intimidated by something they don't necessarily understand, and rather than look for that knowledge, they feel as if it doesn't affect them, so they don't really need to. And and I think that's kind of where society has gone. And I kind of want people to see the person, not the disease. I did a show with someone who's schizophrenic, and there's a lot of stigma around, mental health and things like that. And he was lovely. And, he's a writer and he's so much more than that diagnosis. And to sit down and talk with him, if he didn't tell us about his journey, then I wouldn't know that he was schizophrenic. And I would have just had a great conversation with him. I did anyway, knowing, you know, and he reaches out to me all the time because there's no judgment there. And I
Right.
think that we're very quick to judge people, all people, this goes to race, creed, everything, job site, title, whether you're a man or a woman, it's gender related. And in a society that says they fight for equality, I want to know where these diagnoses fall. Because, in a sense, we really are being prejudiced towards them by not educating ourselves and finding out more. There is some bias there, and I don't think that it should exist, because I think that on top of what they're going through and the struggles they might endure, to have that label and to be treated a certain way because they don't have maybe not the same skills as everybody else, but why should they be treated different? I certainly don't have the same skills as you do, but nobody labels me as disadvantaged because I don't know what you know. So I think that we're setting precedents here, and in a world that we really shouldn't, I know that kids are very fragile, and it's these times of their growth that a lot of who they are, their persona, is really developed. And we want to be very careful and empathetic and compassionate with the choices we're making about their future. And it starts with really that acceptance, because if we're not accepting of them, how are they supposed to accept who they are and grow out of that? Right?
You present some very important points. I think again, the issue has to do with, aside from the label itself, which can come with a lot of charged emotions, right? People may or may not take on different diagnoses well. And so some people feel ashamed of having to face a particular diagnosis in their family. Maybe it's the first time that they've received any diagnosis. Other people feel guilty. So the emotional attachment around these labels creates a context in that interaction and in that point of view and in the response that the parent or the surrounding individuals would have. And so having education around what that means. So if I say, hey, someone is diagnosed with ADHD, what does that really mean? Yes, we know what this name is, right? Kind of like I know my name is Laurelette, and what does that mean? That I'm the daughter of this person and that person, and that there's a background history behind that name. And I think we don't want to discredit that. We don't want to say, well, no, everything's fine, nothing's going on, because that would not be an informed uh, aspect of how to approach this. But if we bother to educate the community around us, right? And that community will shift according to what this individual is exposed to, whether that be the educators, whether that be the parents or caregivers, even doctors. You'd be surprised. Many doctors, they may know their particular science of what they do, but they don't necessarily know everything to the extent of how that affects a life. Like, hey, what does that person's gonna have to face day in and day out? So the counseling aspect around giving someone a diagnosis and empowering them as opposed to leaving them all defeated. Hey, here you go. You have another label. You have this sticker and now you become this and now somehow you're broken.
Yeah.
You're broken and it's painful. It's
Yeah.
painful. I don't think any diagnosis comes with any sense of validation, empowerment, or support because of it.
Well, when you look at things like, because we're not just talking about like ADHD or, disadvantaged children, children on the spectrum. We're not, and I was talking to you yesterday and I said, what exactly does that mean, the spectrum? What spectrum are they on? You know what I mean? Because I mean, it's so broad, that spectrum. So, if I'm questioning it, I wonder what other people must be thinking. So, but even things like, they're bipolar or they're depressed and they're anxious, because there's so many people that are now diagnosed with
Ah,
anxiety disorder, now diagnosed with depression, especially post COVID. I'm seeing a lot more of it. And I don't believe that these are new pop-ups. I think that they were all there, and that maybe because people are educating themselves and they are talking more openly about it, that people are okay with coming forward and say, yes, I'm depressed. But I know that in certain cultures, um, it's stigmatized even in the culture. Um,
this.
so they don't want to talk about it, or they say that it doesn't exist, it's not a real thing. So those labels are what I'm talking about too, that because they're not just labels, they're people's feelings. So, and they are that there is that emotion attached, right? Especially with anxiety and depression and bipolar, there's a lot of emotions in that scale. And when we're not careful with those emotions and how we react to those people, when we're told, they're on antidepressants, they have a depressive disorder or something like that, then I think we are placing them at a disadvantage because we're not giving them the full scope to be who they are. We're not allowing them to be their authentic self. So depression might be part of it. They might be depressed a whole decade of their life and another decade not, right? So different things, traumas and incidents happen in people's lives. And I don't know too many people who have never been depressed a day in their life that walks around smiling, happy all the time. I don't know that they're quick to be put on medication and stuff like that. I'm not a big fan of a lot of these medications. If they need it, certainly I suggest they take it. But I think that they're very free with these medications that have so many other side effects and could even worsen the diagnosis that they're on. But I think these are all labels, and I think that we're very free with them in society today. So, how can we, as educators and people that work with these children, how can we step forward and make a change so that it's not in a label, it's a part of these children, it's a part of their family member, so that we can help the families be more accepting and be able to deal with it too, because a lot of those emotions that happen in the family are based on societal pressures to have a child that's different, because that child might have a very different life than the one that you planned on, right? So for your child. So there's a lot of emotions with that too, but I think there has to be a way that we can educate the families, we could educate the public about really how that it's unacceptable not to be kind, right?
mhm,
And instead of suggesting they be kind of tell them that there's a need to be kind, that we can choose to be more accepting.
mhm.
Because if something was really, really wrong with me, I wouldn't want someone to just see that part of me. Like you see these people on the Special Olympics, right? Even the word special tells you that it's something different in that show, right? So do we need to hear that it's special to look at that show or that event and see that there's something very different about these people with maybe no limbs that rose above whatever disability they faced and said, I'm going to do what I love anyway,
Uh-huh.
right?
Mhm.
But you know, so I mean, and I know it's meant to, in that situation, it's really meant to show you that you can achieve anything, that there is really no limitations if you really set your mind to something. I think that what that label is meant to say in those type of events. But I just think that we have to be a little bit more careful with the words we choose with one another.
You know, I understand your position here. I also understand how we've arrived where we are because again, it's that need for context, but it's also that need for pairing and having the equitable aspect in terms of, for example, competition and expectations, right? It wouldn't be fair to expect of someone who is having a limitation because of different conditions that they may be experiencing to put them to compete with someone who would blow it out of the water just by looking, right? It wouldn't be a fair arena, if you will.
Correct.
So we do have to have the organizing principles around categorizing, even if that were to be in a different manner. I think that the issue is again the lack of education and the way that we have not necessarily educated society at large. Right. I feel that as far as we've come, because we've come far in terms of over the course of just improving conditions for individuals with special needs, for example. But we haven't gone where we need to go, which is all the way without having to put faces. The issue is we ourselves are very competitive by nature, especially in this country. I'm going to say the capitalist mindset, right? A capitalist mindset is not looking for a collective effort. It doesn't necessarily
It's a very
um,
good point.
it doesn't necessarily promote that type of collaborative togetherness, building of anything. What we value is that you're on top, that you are number one, that you win the championship, that you are, um, the best of the best. And it's a very interesting thing because, instead of, yeah, you could still be the best of the best, but how about you lend your hand and bring others up while you're at it? That would make you extraordinary. Not only would you be the best, you
Agreed.
would be, wow, one in a million. And I think that that's not necessarily viewed as valuable in the society that we're in, right? For me, it's critical to always kind of keep this context clear because I personally have found that, at least for me, I like excellence. And even in situations where people would say that a child that I'm seeing will not be able to reach whatever goal. Let's say I create a goal and people like, well, that's really bold, like you're really ambitious. And I'm like, why shouldn't I be ambitious? At least I'll strive to get somewhere here that allows this person to really push forward as opposed to keeping them like right at the basics. Like,
But they
why
also
should
have
I do that?
something to work towards. So, and
Right.
I think everybody needs that. And that's kind of the points I'm making. They if we tell them that they can't achieve certain things, then they have nothing to strive for.
Mhm.
And so I get that we do have to have categories for events and things like that. I totally get that, and that makes perfect sense. But I don't think those categories belong in everyday life. So
Right,
I understand that they should be in different classes because that's going to benefit them. But that's a choice that they have so that they can excel.
right.
Does that make sense? But
Yeah, and that's
I
why the
think that a
education.
lot of their choices are really taken, and they don't have something to aspire to because people are saying, be realistic, this is all you can really do, instead of saying, well, let's push the needle. When I was younger, I watched a show about an autistic boy, and I'll never forget that show. I cried my eyes out at the end, I swear. It was about a little boy who was autistic, and his mother saw, she fought for him to have special classes and all this stuff, and they kind of wrote this child off,
Mhm.
and said that he didn't have learning and stuff like that. So he used to rock all the time. And so she started rocking with her child because that's what he knew. So she started accepting him where he was at and started rocking with him. And he started opening up and coming out of that world with her because she was now accepting him and allowing him to be. And it was just a beautiful story about how she fought for him, and he's talking at the end. And at the end, he goes to a little boy, and the little boy is autistic, and he gives him his balloon.
Mhm.
And the child doesn't talk, and like, but he takes the balloon, and he asked his mom, "Hey, mom, what's wrong with that little boy?" you know and that was him. That was what they had projected would have been him. But the love and the nurturing that he got from his mother, and the fight that she had with the schools to give this kid the resources that he needed, made that difference.
Mhm.
So that's what I'd like to see happen, so that we can create real waves and really help these children. If they're developmentally delayed, is it their perception of what they can achieve, or is it the one
Our
we're instilling in them? So
right.
so that's where I'm not okay with
100%.
it.
100% agree with you in this regard. One of the issues is I find that people in general, right? These are generalities that I've observed throughout the course of my lifetime in interacting with individuals. And I find that people put a barrier when they see an individual with special needs, as opposed to doing the opposite, which is get rid of the barriers and actually get closer, make yourself accessible, make yourself easy to get to know you, easy for them to open up to you, easy for them to approach you, right? And it's so interesting. People do the opposite. People get guarded. People feel like, I don't know, is he good? Is she good? Is he bad? Is he that? They have all kinds of ideas that are all preconceived from their own personal biases. And it's interesting because I observe it even in the body language. They don't
Mm.
have to say much.
You can see it. You could
I observe it.
actually see it. But I know that even when someone sees someone in a wheelchair, they get uncomfortable. So this person might have been in that wheelchair their whole life. But you can ask and say, what happened? Because they'd rather you ask them what happened than stare at them or gawk at them like they're different. You know what I mean? Nobody, no, nobody grows up one day and says, gee, I'd really like to be an alcoholic when I grow up, right?
Or
So
any condition, or any
yes,
condition.
but that's
Agree.
what I'm saying. So nobody says, I want to be born with a disadvantage and have specific things told to me that I can achieve. And I think that's kind of where the common ground comes, where people have to say, what if this was my child? Or what if this was me?
That
How would
requires
I want to be treated? And that's where that give and that learning starts. Because if we can get people to start asking those questions,
Mhm.
when they find themselves, because bias exists everywhere. I
Every
mean, people are different. So, I mean, anybody who says that they don't have any kind of implicit bias or whatever is
They're
just
lying.
lying, because
They're lying.
they're just lying.
We
Because
have it just by virtue of our own experiences that we have all the time. There's
yes,
nothing we can do about that. Again, it definitely has to do with getting educated and being willing, right? Having that willingness, because this would take willingness to say, you know what, I'm going to open my mind and my heart to understand what the children or individuals who are in front of me really need. Even when we have dealt with individuals who have other supports, right? Just because they have access to services doesn't mean that we have to kind of be like, okay, let me dissociate. I don't know you from anywhere, and it doesn't matter that you exist in society. Society has to shift this idea of like not speaking about these issues, of ignoring as if it's not their thing, acting as if it's like, okay, you stay over there hidden in the corner and that you'll be good there. And it's like we don't know you, we don't see you, we don't interact. You're like the like I don't know what word to use, but it's like people avoid you at all costs. And we have to shift. We have to shift that whole mentality around the children, especially when they're young, is a great time to do that because what ends up happening is if children are kept isolated by the time they reach high school, they are for sure very aware, one, that they're different, and two, they already feel a sense of broken self esteem, which does not support them in talking, in expressing their needs, in even smiling. I work on these basic little things that are of self-acceptance. And it's so interesting. A child just, their eyes light up when someone genuinely shows interest in them.
true story. I spent a lot of time with a young man that I became very fond of, and everybody told me he was nonverbal. Everybody told me he was nonverbal, and he spoke all the time. And I didn't understand. So I was talking with the social worker to um to see if I could get him some more services. I thought he needed to be in school and be getting PT and OT and things like that. I felt like they kind of forgot about this child and they wrote him off. And she, was, well, I don't know how well he's going to do. You really think he'll do good? I said the child is brilliant. I said, sometimes these children, even if they're autistic or they have ADHD, they tend to be savants in other areas.
Absolutely.
And I said they're brilliant in that specific area.
That's
And
right.
I said, this child sits on YouTube, ABC.com all day long, and he learns not just in English, but in French and Spanish and German. And I said, I can ask this child what the moral of the story is, and he can always tell me. She said, what do you mean? He doesn't talk. I said, oh, yes, he does.
Yes.
So she said, he's never talked. I said, he talks all the time. So I called the child in and put her on speakerphone. And I called him by name and I said, can you tell me the moral of the story? And he said, the moral of the story is, and I like for the specific show that he was listening to. And she said, when did he start talking? I said, you have to understand that these children are have decisions made for them all day long. When he's on round the clock feed, when he has to go to the bathroom, when he has to
Mhm.
do this. I said, so this is the one thing he can control, his
Absolutely.
voice. And I said he's selectively choosing who to talk to and who not to.
Right. And that comes because, once you have to establish a sense of safety, right? Because if that child does not feel that he's going to be valued, not judged, just valued for who he is, accept him 100%. This is about drawing the capacity to have unconditional love. And so there's a challenge inherent in us human beings now, right? We have to deal with that challenge that we have our ego getting in the way of
Mm,
understanding that when we see children with special needs, it's about unconditional love. It's not about something else. It's not about your agenda. It's not about your temper tantrum and your personal wants and dislikes and all that. And that can be tough because our egos get crushed and, we're like, wow, we got to fix this. We got to whatever. And I see this a lot. And it doesn't mean that we don't work towards goals, towards achieving things, towards building knowledge, towards creating all these awareness in the different things that we would need to help a child in. But if we cannot remove all of that baggage around acceptance of what we have, then all of the other things that we may want to do becomes so much harder to achieve.
I agree.
So much harder, especially the emotional state. If a child is not feeling valued, is not emotionally connected, is not emotionally able to feel that they can be vulnerable, it's very hard to do anything else. It's very hard. Um, just like us, human beings that don't have, let's say, a speech and language delay or a speech impairment. It doesn't matter. My emotional state is also going to impact how
I
I
have a
show up.
speech impairment. My tongue gets in the way.
But like for example, if we're not having an issue that we know of, we still have to work on ourselves. And I think that we forget this. We forget, I've had people that sometimes start saying all kinds of things, just because the child is little doesn't mean that they don't hear and they don't process anything. They just forget. And it's like what you said, Andra. They just make all kinds of decisions. They assume that because the child is not responding back, that that child doesn't understand. And it really has to change. It requires a higher level of consciousness,
I agree.
you
So we're
know?
going to end it on that note. Any last words you want to share with the audience before we
Well,
bounce?
to really focus on getting to know your child. If I were to give a parent an advice, the number one thing I would say, hey, take the time to just observe your child. Just notice them for a moment. Start jotting down some observations. Really get to know them. Value who they are. See where their strengths are. Because if you don't focus on looking for strengths and you only look for all the things that are wrong, then that's what's going to be amplified in your mind and in your heart. All you're going to see is all of these problems.
I
When you
agree.
switch, then everything changes too.
I agree. All right, guys, I want to thank you for tuning in to myself and my co-host here. We love talking about real issues that are going on and affecting our children and our world. These children are our future. So
They are.
we do have to make an attempt to really change the trajectory of where they're going. And the only ones that can really do that is us because we're raising these children. We're a part of their society. We are their neighbors. We are their family. And if we don't change, how do we expect them to? So thanks for tuning in, guys. Have a great night. Say
Bye.
goodbye.
Bye. Thank you, everybody.
Hello.
Ciao.